Okay, so my name is Christine. I work at the Old Town Library. I'm in LA there. Uh, the League of Women Voters has generously des agreed to host this program for us. And I have a quick introduction to read to everybody. Um, and then I will hand it over to them. All right. So, welcome to tonight's ballot issue presentation offered by the League of Women Voters for Larimer County. We're so pleased you've been able to join us tonight to hear about most of the proposed measures you'll be seeing on this year's general election ballots. Tonight's presenters are Pat Berger, President of the League of Women Voters of Larimer County, and Kathy Mayer, who is Vice President of the local league. They will cover the statewide ballot issues that will be on everyone's ballot and as many of the local ballot issues as time allows, focusing on a Larimer County measure and questions about increasing funding for the Poudre and Thompson school districts. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Mics will be muted for everyone. Videos will also be turned off. To ensure we make it through all the ballot issues, Pat and Kathy will outline them in batches of about 5, then pause for questions. If you have a question, please type it into the chat as it occurs to you. I will keep track of the questions and relay them to Pat and Kathy during those intervals. Not everyone will be able to see the questions. They'll only go to us as well. So I suggest you have your blue books with you. You should have gotten those in mail. If you don't have one and you need one, the library has extra copies of the blue books and some of the handouts that the League of Women Voters will talk about. Also, I will be in the chat putting some of the different links that they suggest. Although I'm not sure if I can put that in the chat if we're limiting chat. So I might do that through email, unless you all want them to be able to access those links during the presentation. Is that something you wanted them to do? Okay, so I will put those in the chat and we'll figure that out. So there are a lot of ballot issues to cover this year, so I'll turn it over to Pat to get started. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. Oh, also, we're trying to keep track of attendance. If you are with more than one person watching, that's totally fine. Can you just tell me in the chat if you have more than one person watching, and that way we can have a more accurate attendance. Okay, thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Pat Berger, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Larimer County. Thank you all for being here and wanting to be an informed voter. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that was formed nationally about 104 years ago, about the time women got the right to vote. We realized that women and people in general eventually needed to be educated on how to vote. And our mission has been for many years to empower voters and defend democracy, little d democracy. And so we are a political organization, but we never take a position on who to vote for or parties. So we don't support parties or politicians. We do a lot of studying on what the issues are that are relevant to our communities. And occasionally we do take a position on issues after careful study. So again, thank you all for being here. Kathy? Kathy? Hello? I think Kathy is going to start by talking about voting.
Kathy, can you unmute now?
Okay, here we go. Okay, that was a little stressful. So, at our in-person presentations, we can go, let's go to slide 4. Go ahead to slide number 4. So here we are. Man. So at our in-person presentations, we usually hand out handouts. And this picture that you see here is one of the things that we would normally hand out. We don't have those online, of course, but if you're willing to get a soft copy version, we can put a link to that in the chat, or you can probably find one of these at your local library. This is a handout that gives you, it's called the Pocket Guide, that gives you a snapshot view of all the ballot issues. And that's what we're going to be going over tonight. So go ahead to slide 15 or slide 5. We've got 14 statewide ballot issues this year, if you didn't already know. Maybe you've seen how big your ballot is when it came in the mail, but there are 7 amendments to the Constitution that are proposed, and 5 are propositions which would change the state law. And 2 of the issues are questions that involve tax changes. Go ahead to slide 6. And this is a list of the statewide issues we're going to be covering tonight. But on top of all of these, we have a Larimer County measure for you to vote on, to go over. And the city of Fort Collins has 5 issues on the ballot. And if you're in Loveland, the city of Loveland has 8 issues on the ballot. So all of this is in addition to choosing your candidates that you prefer for federal, state, and local offices, and voting on retaining the judges. And we do want to emphasize that it's important not to skip the section on the judges. So please vote for your judges' retentions. With all this to vote for, you'll have a lot of bubbles to fill in, and we should all be getting ready for some carpal tunnel syndrome to set in after filling in all those bubbles. We had a few general remarks to make before we get into the ballot issues themselves. Most of the ballots have already been mailed out. You probably received yours in the last few days. Remember that they need to be received by the county clerk by mail or dropped in a drop box by November 5th at 7 p.m. Postmarks don't count. So if you're mailing, make sure you allow time for your ballot to arrive before 7 p.m. on November 5th. Voter service and polling centers will begin opening on October 21st. All those centers, you can vote in. At those centers, you can vote in person, obtain a replacement mail-in ballot, deliver your voted mail-in ballot, register to vote, change your address, or vote on an ADA accessible voting machine. We also wanted to remind you that you can sign up for BallotTrax. That's spelled BallotTrax at the website that we'll try to provide in chat. But you can just Google that and you'll find it, BallotTrax. After signing up there, you can track the status of your ballot from when it's mailed out to you to being turned in and counted at the county clerks. One last tip. There's one really great one-stop shop for all your unbiased election information needs, customized to your address. You can find that at vote411.org. That's a national service provided by the League of Women Voters, and our local league fills out the local information that's relevant to your ballots. So you put in your address there and you get customized information for everything that's going to be on your specific ballot. It's a really helpful place to get information on ballot issues, also information on the candidates. The candidates will have answered questionnaires that they've been given. So that's helpful to read. Voter registration info, drop boxes, and a lot more. So now we'll go right on into the ballot issue presentation, and Pat's going to start us off with Amendment G. So next slide.
I think it's slide 9. That's just what we're going to cover. We'll hopefully have time for all this. I'm just going to move right along. There we go. All right, Amendment G. It modifies the property tax exemption for veterans with disabilities. This was placed on the ballot by the legislature, And it is an amendment to the Constitution, and therefore it requires 55% positive or yes votes in order to actually take effect. If it passes, it expands the number of veterans living with a disability who qualify for a property tax exemption for a portion of the value of their primary resident. So most of you are probably familiar with the homestead exemption. It's currently in the state constitution, and a change in it must go to the voters to amend it. It can't be legislated. If you go to the blue book, you'll see that there's a lot of language there that basically tries to give you a very detailed explanation of which veterans it's going to expand this property tax exemption to. I would say that it's really just about making sure that people with disabilities who are unable to go to work, as defined by the Veterans Affairs, is they're classified as individually unemployable. It's going to open that up a little bit wider. There are approximately estimated to be about 3,700 veterans in Colorado who are not otherwise able to claim this exemption now, who would be eligible if this constitutional amendment were to pass. Currently seniors over 65 and other, veterans get 50% off of their taxes over the first $200,000 in home value. This exemption reduces taxes collected by the county and paid to local government. However, the state reimburses local governments for all that revenue that is lost. So it would increase state spending by about 1.8 million as estimated by the Legislative Council. But the money that is available for local governments would not be changed. That will be unchanged. Okay, let's move on. Next slide. Again, I've mentioned the blue book. If you use this QR code, you can find a digital copy of it, and you should have been mailed one. That is produced not by the League of Women Voters, by the Legislative Council. It does give you a lot more detailed information. Next slide. Here are additional resources to find out more about the Amendment G. All right, next slide. All right, next one, Amendment H. This is a change in the Constitution regarding how judges are disciplined, the procedure and the confidentiality of that. Wait, go on, there we go. And so Colorado judges must follow a code of conduct. Misconduct complaints currently are handled by the Commission on Judicial Discipline. The members are appointed by the Supreme Court and the governor, and some of the Supreme Court sits on that right now. This amendment would create an independent oversight commission made up of citizens, lawyers, and judges to resolve complaints. It would also allow for more information to be shared earlier with the public. Proponents say that this enhances transparency, integrity, and independence of judicial disciplinary process and removes a self-regulating effect. Opponents will say that the system is currently working. This all came about, next slide, please, I think. This came about partially because in Colorado Springs, I believe it was, there was a newspaper who found that, did a lot of investigating and found that there were some issues with the current system. This does not increase state spending very much at all, about $50,000. Here is the information on the judges. And as Kathy, next slide, please. As Kathy said, in the back of your blue book, on your ballot, there's a lot of judges that you are asked to vote on whether they should be retained. And in the blue book, you will find good information on how the people have ranked them, the judges. And so I really encourage you to take a look at that. There's other resources here on this page as well. Next slide. Amendment I is a constitutional amendment to change bail. Oops. Go back one, please. Yeah, there we go. For first-degree murder. Again, this was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and it needs 55% to pass. What it does is it restores the ability for judges to deny bail for first-degree murder when certain criteria are met. Those criteria have to do with whether there's a preponderance of the evidence and the presumption of guilt is great. In 2020, the General Assembly abolished the Colorado death penalty. This amendment actually closes a loophole created when the death penalty was abolished. If the amendment fails, it requires judges to set bail for everybody that's being charged for first-degree murder. This doesn't have a fiscal impact. Next slide. Recommend looking at the blue book. Next slide. Amendment J repeals the definition of marriage in the Constitution. This is an interesting one. We actually have in our Constitution, in Colorado Constitution, the definition of a marriage as a union between one man and one woman as recognized. Now, this constitutional amendment, again, requires a 55%. No, I'm sorry. It was put in the ballot by the legislature, but because it doesn't, it just takes something out of the Constitution, not put something in, it will pass with a majority vote rather than a 55% like the amendments that are actually adding words to the Constitution. So it removes this ban, but it's interesting that the ban isn't really in effect. Same-sex marriage was legalized in Colorado by a state law passed in 2013, and federal Supreme Court ruled nationally in 2015 that to allow gay marriage. Proponents say it's necessary due to the unpredictability of the Supreme Court. A no vote would leave the Colorado Constitution language that says that a marriage is valid only between a man and a woman. Next slide, please. Okay.
I think we're at our break point.
Oh, very good.
So I guess, are there any questions yet?
I do not see any questions as of yet.
That could mean we're doing a good job or we aren't. So who knows? All right.
All right. Shall we roll on with Amendment K?
Sure.
Sounds good.
Okay. So Amendment K is modifying constitutional election deadlines. And I don't know if Pat mentioned this, but while I'm thinking about it, I wanted to make sure everybody knows that you're not going to see these titles on the ballot itself. You'll only see Amendment K. There's going to be no convenient descriptive title in there. So it's helpful to have your blue book handy or something or some notes so you're thinking about the right amendment. But just so you're aware of that, you're just going to see the abbreviated number or letter label on these ballot issues on your ballot. So Amendment K was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and you might be interested to know that it was referred to the ballot with really broad support in the legislature, with 95 for votes and only 1 against. So your representatives in the General Assembly feel relatively strongly about this. This measure passes with a 55% vote. as it's a constitutional amendment. So what if it passes? This measure was requested by the Colorado election officials, and is going to change the Constitution to make 3 election-related deadlines earlier than they currently are. First of all, the deadline for citizens to submit collected signatures for initiative and referendum petitions would be moved to fall 1 week earlier than they currently are. So currently, the deadline is 3 months before the election. This measure would move it to 3 months plus 1 week before the election. The second deadline it changes is the deadline for judges to file a form indicating their intention to seek another term. So the retention form. So that also would be moved, the deadline would be moved to be 1 week earlier, moving it from 3 months before the election to 3 months plus 1 week before the election. And the third deadline that would change is for the deadline for when the official text and titles for ballot issues have to be published in newspapers across the state. Currently, the publication must happen at least 15 days before the election. This measure would change it so it would add another 30 days in advance. So the publication would need to take place 45 days before the election rather than the current 15. So all of this happened because the county clerks and election officials are finding it difficult and increasingly difficult as ballot measures become more complex, and we have metro districts and all kinds of special districts that are taxing. It's increasing the amount of time they need to prepare all the individual ballots, because each one of these districts needs to get a specially printed ballot that has different issues on it. Also with translation services, bearing in mind that these absentee ballots need to be sent out in advance. So preparing all that time, all of those things in advance to be done in time, they're really down to crunch time. So they're asking across the state, election officials are asking for a little bit more time to get that material ready. So if it fails, we'd maintain the current constitutional deadlines for election filings and publications of ballot issues into newspapers, leaving them at 3 months prior for citizens submitting signatures and 3 months prior for judges to file for retention and 15 days prior to election for the content of ballot issues to be published in newspapers. Why is it on the ballot? Because all amendments to the state constitution have to go out to the people for a vote. And what it's really boils down to is this will allow more time to finalize the content of ballots before being printed and sent out to voters. It will also give voters a little more time to do research and review the ballot issues. So the fiscal impact is just seen as something that's going to be shifting. It's going to shift the workload a little bit. So no real fiscal impact, but shifting and reducing the workload for county clerks and recorders. And the state government will not have an impact on associated costs. So that is Amendment K. Next slide. Amendment 79 is for the constitutional right to abortion. This was placed on the ballot by citizen initiative. You'll notice the amendments that have letter identifiers were put on the ballot by the legislature. The amendments that have numerical designators were put on the ballot by citizen initiatives. So that's useful to know maybe. So this was a citizen initiative, and it will require 55% of the vote to pass. If it does pass, there are 2 facets to the amendment. It makes abortion a constitutional right in Colorado and prohibits state and local governments from denying, impeding, or discriminating against exercising that right. It will also, the second facet would be to repeal the current ban on state and local funding for abortion services. This ban on public funding for abortion services has been in place since 1984. Repealing the ban on public funding would permit Medicaid to pay for an abortion, and it would also open the door for state and local government employees to possibly get abortion coverage through their state or local government provided healthcare insurance plans. If it fails, the current Colorado statute will remain in effect. A pregnancy may be terminated at any time. So currently under a Colorado statute, a pregnancy may be terminated at any time. And it would, if this amendment fails, it would continue to be the authority of the state legislature to determine legality of abortions. If it fails, it would also, the ban on public funding for abortion services would continue. So no government provided state and local money could be used to pay for abortions. In current law, there are exceptions to federal and state law that allow Medicaid to pay for an abortion when the life of the pregnant woman is in danger or when the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. Why is this on the ballot? Under current Colorado law, a pregnancy may be terminated at any time. So why are we talking about this? So a citizen initiative that takes the current is taking the current policy a step further to put the right of abortion in the state's constitution with the aim of ensuring that abortion will remain available in all across the state, despite any changes in the political climate. Since the measure repeals the current ban on state and local funding of abortion services, future decisions on funding those services would be made by the Colorado legislature and local governments. It's important to recognize that this measure does not guarantee government-provided abortion funding, but it potentially would allow state and local money to be used to pay for abortions through Medicaid or state and local government employee health plans. The fiscal impact, at this time, there is no change in spending estimated because it really depends on future decisions by the state legislature and local governments if anything would change in that respect. So I think next slide, maybe. Yeah, so the next slide, just referring you to additional information about the legal history of the abortion question in Colorado, if you're interested in the progressive events throughout Colorado history. That is Amendment 79. So on to Amendment 80. The constitutional right to school choice placed on the ballot by a citizen initiative, requiring 55% of the vote to pass. If it passes, this measure would create a constitutional right to school choice for children in grades K through 12. It also creates a right for parents to direct the education of their children. It also establishes a new constitutional definition of school choice to include public neighborhood and charter schools, private schools, home schools, open enrollment options, and future innovations in education. This measure results in no immediate change to state law or the enrollment policies of local school districts. So if it fails, we would maintain the current system of school choice in state law, which is not in the state constitution. And that allows parents to choose from many public school options already. Or the current law allows parents to choose to educate their children in a private or homeschool or other environment. You might not be aware that currently in Colorado, public school options include charter schools and some online schools. And students may attend any public school for free, even if they do not live in the school district where the school is located. Public schools receive public funding from state and local governments. Private schools and homeschooling do not receive any public funding under current law. So this is on the ballot because a citizen initiative obtained enough signatures across the state to support enshrining in the Constitution, the right of parents to choose the school they feel is appropriate for their children, whether it be public, private, online, religious, homeschooling, or something else. Passing a constitutional amendment would protect this right from being taken away by future legislation. Fiscal impact is a little bit convoluted in this, so I'll try to explain. By creating a new constitutional right to school choice for children and parents, Amendment 80 may affect how the legislature makes policies about school choice and may lead to changes to school-related law and local school district policy via court interpretation or direction. No immediate impact on education-related spending by the state or school district would happen, but it may increase. The spending might increase on legal expenses and planning costs. The legal expenses would result from lawsuits filed to resolve potential conflicts with current law that prohibits public funding of private schools. Depending on how the measure is interpreted by the courts and the state legislature, the measure may change the allocation of state or local funding for education. So no immediate fiscal impact, but there may be an impact down the road. And that is Amendment 80. So next slide, please.
Are we going to pause for questions?
All right, let's pause for questions.
Any questions in the chat, Christine?
We did get one that says this is for text and titles on the ballot issue. I'm thinking that they meant links, that I was able to send the links out to everybody. If you would, could you just go over quickly what those links, I know you did it, but what the links are for?
What the links are?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what order they came in, but so we provided a link for vote411.org, a link for BallotTrax, if you want to register for that. If you didn't get a copy of the Blue Book, there's a link where you can find an online version of that. There is a link for the League of Women Voters of Colorado, where you can see a lot of election resources, including the handout that we showed a picture of early on, but some other excellent resources as well. And there is a link to a summary of local ballot issues that was developed by our local League of Women Voters of Larimer County that covers Larimer County, Fort Collins, Loveland, Poudre School District, and Thompson School District issues. A link for our League of Women Voters of Larimer County website, which if you go right to the homepage of, has immediately a lot of election-related options for you to consider there, helpful links to a variety of election-related things. We've also included a link if you're interested in really looking more closely at the fiscal impact of these ballot issues. There is a link to the Legislative Council staff's website, or it's a PDF document that the General Assembly's council staff created. If you don't know the Legislative Council, that's a nonpartisan service organization that develops information for our General Assembly. They have excellent material, so we provided a link that has all of the fiscal impact statements that they develop for each one of these statewide ballot issues. And I think there is a link to a program, CSU website that explains a program that they're developing that's related to another issue we'll be talking about later, Proposition 128, on a new veterinary position or career field. and also a link to information on Proposition 131. I'm not sure if I included those links yet. Maybe I'll do that later, but
Those are included.
They are? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's Proposition 131, that's on open primaries and ranked choice voting. And we have a link to a really good Colorado Sun article that explains how that works. And a highlight of that article is there's a link embedded in the article to a 1-minute video that does a really nice job illustrating how ranked choice voting works. So you might want to take a peek at that. I thought it was really helpful. So those, in a nutshell, that's what our links are that we shared with you.
Wow, that's a lot of links.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
there was a lot. There's a lot of links.
We do have some more questions. One is on 80. Is there any change besides putting what is currently done into the Constitution, or maybe money can be given to homeschooling? Not sure if I understand.
Can you repeat that?
On 80, are there any changes besides putting what is currently done into the Constitution, or maybe money can be given to the homeschooling? Not sure. They say not sure if I understand.
Okay, so Amendment 80 does nothing but it doesn't say money's going to be allocated anywhere. It doesn't say anything about school funding. It simply says all of these options will be available to parents. So it changes the definition of school choice. And so by doing that, though, it creates a little bit of friction in the law because it puts private schools in with public schools as all being part of school choice. And what would have to be sorted out later is how you're going to allocate money to all of these different entities. Right now, the only state funding is allocated for public schools. That includes the neighborhood public school, charter schools, and some online schools. So the new definition of school choice would and this amendment would say parents have the opportunity and children have the right to choose schools beyond that framework. So it and that right already exists, but yeah, it's a little bit confusing. But the bottom line is, Amendment 80 says nothing about funding. The funding issues would have to be sorted out later. As legal decisions, legislative decisions are made on how money would be allocated, and legal questions about what money can be spent on what would be sorted out through courts.
And I think you just answered this. The question before that was, what does in 80, what does the right for parents to direct the education of their children mean? And I think you kind of just went over that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of information on that, but to say that they so the Amendment 80 gives the right to the children for choosing a school, but it's also giving a right to parents to decide what kind of education the children get. So there's not too much elaboration on that. So
okay, another question is for Kay. They're asking about about publications, perhaps it's for text and titles in newspapers. They're asking about text and titles on the ballot itself.
Okay. So Amendment K just has to do with changing deadlines. So this would be the deadlines by which those the ballot text and titles, the ballot issue text and titles. So these things we're going through right now, all of the text to exactly how those ballots questions would be phrased on your ballot, all that text has to be sorted out, and the titles that go along with them has to be sorted out. With Amendment K, it would have to be 45 days prior to the election, because it has to be printed in newspapers. It has to be published in newspapers across the state 45 days before the election. So voters will have the opportunity to know what's going to be on their ballot 45 days in advance of the election. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, there's another about Amendment K. What is the process for a citizen-initiated measure to get on the ballot? Is moving the deadline up a week harmful to this process, or can it be made up
Yes.
somewhere
Well,
else?
yes, it does shorten, let me find the specific. It
I think-
does shorten that a bit. So it shortens the time to collect signatures and file petitions, which could make it more difficult for citizens seeking to change the state laws. So yes, it cuts a week into their time for collecting and submitting signatures.
And that person with the first question about K responded again, and they said, is it for publication in newspapers or on the ballot itself? They think the answer is newspapers. So maybe, is there something
It
about?
is the deadline is about publishing in newspapers.
Okay.
But bear in mind, it's going to be one and the same, because once you publish it, that's what it has to be. I mean, it has to be decided. You know, the final language has to be decided for publication in newspapers by that 45-day prior deadline by Amendment K. And so by the same token, that's deciding the language, that's finalizing the language for the ballots. It's going to be the same.
Okay. They said great, thanks. And then
Okay.
another one, is there info about what groups initiated each of the amendments?
Yes, there is, and you can look that up. We're not going to go into it tonight, but an excellent source for that kind of information is Ballotpedia. I didn't give a link for that, but you can Google it and find it. Ballotpedia, and you'll have to go through the little filters or search window to find your Colorado whatever ballot issue you're looking for. And it has terrific information there about, it has the specific language of the ballot issue, the organizations that initiated it, organizations that support it, organizations that are against it, and a lot of helpful explanations. So I recommend Ballotpedia for that kind of information.
Okay, and then the last one I have right now, and I know the league is by nonpartisan, but someone did ask, what are the league's positions on these issues?
That's a great question. The league does take some issues, some positions, and we plan on talking briefly about that at the end of our presentation. And I found that Ballotpedia was very helpful too. And if you Google Colorado Proposition JJ or whatever, one of the sites that will be mentioned is Ballotpedia. You don't even need to know how to.
Yeah, good tip. That's a good tip. Yeah.
And then I guess the last question is, where do they get information, judge information?
Excellent question. The best place I think to get judge information, although I think there were some other sources on this slideshow, is in the Blue Book, in the back of the Blue Book, is what I have always turned to.
Okay, I think we're caught up on questions. So
thanks, Christine. Okay, so moving right along, there's just so much to cover. Proposition JJ was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and it needs to be passed with a majority vote. It was, by the way, also passed with hardly any opposition. So it allows the state to keep sport betting tax revenue above the amount previously approved by voters and use this money for water projects rather than refunding it to casinos and sports betting operators. So what happened was the state, when they passed this law back in 2019, legalizing sports betting and authorizing the state to collect this $29 million per year, that $29 million was an estimate of what kind of revenue would be coming in. And because they specified an amount, this proposition has to be passed in order for the state to keep more of that money that's coming in from sports betting. Okay, so if it fails, the state will pay refunds to casinos and sports betting operators when the sports betting tax revenue is greater than the $29 million that was previously approved. The estimates are that that money will be around $1 million in 23-24 and go up from there to, like, they're estimating $2.5 million more than the $29 million in, say, 25-26. If it passes, if this Proposition JJ passes, the amount collected over the 29 million will not be refunded to casinos and sports betting operators. Instead, it will be spent on water projects. Of the 87 million allocated for Colorado's planned grants between 2017-18 and 24-25, about 43 million of that came from sport betting revenue. So if this passes, there will be increased funding for water projects. Next slide. Proposition KK, question put to you by the legislature and would require a majority vote to pass. It creates a new tax on firearms, firearm parts, ammunition, and uses that revenue to fund crime victim services, mental health services, veterans, youth programs, school safety programs. So the sales tax would be 6.5% for all of these sales. The Colorado Constitution requires voters to approve any new taxes, which is why it is on the ballot. The firearms dealers, manufacturers, and ammunition sellers are responsible for paying. Sellers with annual sales of less than $20,000 are exempt, and retail sales to law enforcement officers, agencies, and active military duties are also exempt. Private sales are not subject to this new tax. The measure is expected to generate up to about $39 million in the first full year, and the revenue would be distributed around all of those services previously mentioned. Next slide. Okay, there were some additional resources there. Let's pause on that slide just for a moment so people can see. So some of these propositions are a way to collect more taxes and are a little bit of a change in the Tabor rules. So, okay, now we can move on. All right. Did we miss one? We didn't, did we? No. Okay. Proposition 127, the prohibiting of bobcat lynx and mountain lion hunting. This was put on the ballot by a citizens initiative, and it is a change in the law, so it requires a majority vote to pass. It makes it illegal for hunting bobcat, lynx, and mountain lions. It is important to note that lynx, because they are endangered, currently are not allowed to be hunted. It establishes penalties and fines and damage reimbursement ineligibility. So what does that mean? It means that because big cats are, and specifically mountain lions, are being removed from the definition of big game, that if you have animals, say you're a rancher and a mountain lion kills a cow, you cannot any longer, if this passes, you would not be able to any longer get reimbursed for that asset being destroyed. Hunting lynx remains illegal under state and federal law. Bobcats are currently classified as threatened in Colorado, but it's unknown. But the the population is pretty stable. Mountain lions are not currently considered threatened, and there's supposedly around 3,800 to 4,400 in the state, which is considered a stable population. The Colorado Wildlife Department issues about 500 hunting licenses for mountain lions every year. About 300 male mountain lions are killed and about 200 female mountain lions. It is, even though the language that is in the proposition talks about trophy hunting, there is actually a ban on trophy hunting. If you kill a mountain lion, you are legally required to dress the meat for human consumption currently. There are certain ways in which you could kill a mountain lion or a bobcat under this measure. In defense of human life, livestock, personal property, or you hit a mountain lion with your car. An employee or contractor of any federal, state, or local agency acting in the official capacity to manage animals is exempt. They may kill mountain lions and bobcats as a result of an accident in a motor vehicle, a vessel, a train, or for scientific research or humane euthanasia, or other examples of exemptions under if this proposition were to pass. Those are exemptions to the ability to kill a mountain lion. Okay, let's see. Our arguments for and against can be found in the Blue Book, Ballotpedia, and other news outlets. Next slide.
I think we're at break time.
Yeah, I do want to say that there is some fiscal impact for Proposition 127, outlawing bobcat and mountain lion hunting. It's pretty small, but the state does make some money off of these hunting licenses, and but then they are also not reimbursing people any longer for if some cow or cattle get killed by mountain lions. And so there's a little bit of a fiscal impact for this. Yeah, questions?
I am not seeing any currently. If anyone has any questions, please post them now.
Pardon me.
While we give a little time for that, I wanted to go over a question I noticed came to me in chat about Amendment 80 on school choice. The question was, if we don't believe in spending tax money on private and religious schools, would passing this amendment affect the ability of students to choose? And the answer to that question is no. So if this ballot measure passes, it really doesn't change the available options for Colorado residents. The available options are the same whether this ballot issue passes or not. It's just a matter of how choice is defined in the Constitution and the implications that might have further down the road for funding more than public schools. So passing, whether Amendment 80 passes or not, does not affect your ability to choose the school of your choice for your children. Are there any more questions on the more recent issues Pat described?
I am not seeing any.
Okay, so we will move on to. Uh-oh, did Pat lose her mic?
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I muted myself because I started coughing. I realized I couldn't unmute myself. About that.
Okay, are we set? We'll go on to 128.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, we didn't get any other questions, so yep.
Right. So Proposition 128 has to do with parole eligibility for crimes of violence. It was put on the ballot by a citizen initiative and passes with a majority vote. So what would it do? In short, this measure changes requirements for parole and eligibility for people convicted of certain violent crimes. If this measure were to pass, starting on the 1st of January, 2025, anyone convicted of certain violent crimes would be required to serve 85% of their sentence before being eligible for discretionary parole, or reduce their sentence by receiving earned time. Also, it has a kind of 3 strikes and you're out rule. Someone convicted of 3 or more crimes of violence would be ineligible for both earned time and discretionary parole. So once you're convicted of a violent crime 3 times, you have no chance of parole under this measure or earned time. So this would mean person would have to serve their entire sentence in prison, period. And at the end of their sentence, they'd be released on mandatory parole. So that's what would happen if the measure passed. If it doesn't pass, parole eligibility remains the same as it is. Currently, people convicted of these violent crimes must serve 75% of their sentence before being eligible for discretionary parole. And sentences can be reduced by time earned for progress made toward personal, professional, or educational goals. The kinds of violent crimes we're talking about include second-degree murder, sexual assault, aggravated robbery, first-degree assault, kidnapping, first-degree arson, and first-degree burglary. If you're wondering how many people this would affect, the Blue Book says every year about 220 people in Colorado are sentenced to prison for these kinds of crimes. So currently, these people will serve an average of 23 years in prison with the current parole eligibility rules. That average would likely increase if this measure passes, since they'd be required to spend more of their sentence in prison. It's on the ballot because this initiative is sponsored by an organization that believes that Colorado is experiencing a violent crime and property crime surge. The ballot measure is intended to reduce crime and ensure that justice is served. What is it going to cost? They think the measure would increase state funding or state spending in 2 ways. First would be a kind of modest increase in a short-term expense of about $12,000 to update Department of Corrections computerized case management software. And in the longer term, after about 20 years, state spending would need to increase to support the longer prison sentences convicts would have to serve. And of course, inflation would probably continue to add to those costs. That is Proposition 128. So the next slide, please. Oh, we have some additional resources in the Blue Book that explains discretionary parole and mandatory parole. Discretionary being just getting out earlier than your sentence says. Mandatory parole is just what you're on mandatory parole once you're released from prison. So you're supervised. And there is a nice comparison chart you can look at in the Blue Book. So 129. This one's quite interesting. Establishing veterinary professional associates as a career. Placed on the ballot by a citizen initiative and passes with a majority vote. What would it do? If this measure passes, it would create a new mid-level regulated profession that would be the first of its kind in the country. A position between a veterinary technician who has a 2-year associate's degree and a veterinarian who has at least 8 years of education. The new profession would be called the Veterinary Professional Associate, or VPA. And it would require at least a master's degree in veterinary clinical care or the equivalent. The VPA would have to be registered with the State Board of Veterinary Medicine and would be able to diagnose illnesses in animals, perform routine surgeries, and order and perform tests and procedures. And all of these duties would have to be performed under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. It's on the ballot because an organization sponsoring this proposition says that there aren't enough veterinarians in Colorado, and it's often difficult for people to find and afford care for their animals. Proponents believe this measure would expand the workforce, making veterinary care more accessible and more affordable. What would it cost? Costs would be minimal to implement, but the workload would increase for the State Board of Veterinary Medicine, which is a panel of 5 vets, 2 vet techs, 2 members of the public. And that state board, state board costs associated with oversight and enforcement would increase in future years as these new VPAs get credentials and their ranks grow. Because this board is supervisory, more people to supervise, evaluate, credential, et cetera, it's more work for the board. So to implement this, the State Board of Veterinary Medicine would have to develop a set of requirements for licensing VPAs and establishing a credentialing organization. The credentialing organization could require VPA candidates to complete a university program for VPAs and pass a VPA exam. So I use the word could there because it hasn't quite been established what exactly the requirements, what specifically the educational requirements would be, and what would satisfy the requirements of being registered as a VPA. So that's why we included a link to a CSU website that gives details on a program that's in development there for people that might want to get this kind of qualification, even though the qualification doesn't yet exist. They're working on it. So that might be helpful to look at. It will give you an idea of what kind of education is planned and the kind of medical procedures and whatnot, the limitations of this career field would be. I found it to be a helpful read there. So that's Proposition 128. What's our next slide? Or 129, sorry. Next slide. Oh yeah, in the blue book, there is a nice comparison chart that shows you the different, I'll call them for convenience, ranks in the veterinary profession. So you can see what's involved at each level and where this VPA would fit in. Next slide. $130, funding for law enforcement. So this is a law enforcement funding measure that's also called the Back the Blue measure. It was put on the ballot by a citizen initiative and needs a majority vote to pass. What does it do? This measure would create a new $350 million state fund that would supplement funding for law enforcement. The Colorado Department of Public Safety would distribute funding to local law enforcement agencies. And these additional funds would be used to increase salaries for police, sheriffs, and other law enforcement positions, pay hiring, retention, and merit bonuses, hire additional law enforcement officers, and fund education and training of police officers. It would also pay a $1 million death benefit to survivors of law enforcement officer who is killed in the line of duty. In addition, and that $1 million death benefit is in addition to death or disability benefits provided through the killed officer's pension. What if it fails? If it fails, the current level of funding for law enforcement agencies will remain unchanged. Families of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty would continue to receive existing benefits provided under current law. The current death benefit varies by location and the officer's employing agency. This is on the ballot because the sponsoring organization had the intention to direct the state legislature to allocate funding from the existing budget to ensure law enforcement officers throughout the state are highly trained and well compensated to combat crime, including illegal drug trafficking. So an important phrase there is the idea is to direct the state legislature to allocate funding from the existing budget. So there's no supplemental revenue that's going to fuel this special fund. This measure requires funding to come from Colorado's existing budget, not new taxes. It does not require that the full $350 million fund be allocated in a single year, however. What amounts law enforcement agencies would receive in grants would be determined by state legislature and the Colorado Department of Public Safety. The Legislative Council projects a need to allocate $4 million per year to provide the death benefits. The state's obligation to provide death benefits would continue indefinitely and would eventually require additional state expenditures in future years. You can imagine. So that's a rough idea of the fiscal impact of that one. And what do we have on the next slide? No additional information, so we'll go right on to 131. The grand finale for our statewide ballot issue presentation is a whopper, establishing all candidate primary and ranked choice voting general elections. This is a citizen initiative. That's how it got on the ballot, and it passes with a majority vote. So what does it do? It's going to change our elections for most offices across the state in two pretty big ways. Number one, it's going to abolish the current system of party primaries and replace it with an all-candidate top four primary in which the top four vote getters, regardless of party affiliation, advance to the general election. And secondly, it's going to use ranked choice voting for general elections. That means voters would rank as many or as few of the four candidates as he wishes in order of preference. This voting method is also called instant runoff, because as votes are tallied in immediate successive rounds, the candidate with the lowest number of votes is eliminated and ranked votes are redistributed until a winner emerges with more than half of the active votes. This kind of algorithmic instant runoff eliminates the need for a separate runoff election, saving voters time and reducing election costs. It's important to note that the actual ballot may look different from the example that you see in the blue books. Can you show me the next slide? We might have a depiction of this. I can't remember. Yeah, here we are. So here's a sample of what it might look like, but we're letting everybody know that this is just a theoretical illustration. The ballot may look very different from this example. We don't yet know what it's going to look like, and it depends on the design rules that have not yet been developed and could vary with decisions made by different election officials. So there's one big caveat to discuss with this proposition, and that is that it wouldn't go into effect immediately. If successful, this measure was originally planned to go into effect in 2026, but state legislators felt The new system's tires needed to be kicked a little bit before being used statewide. So they passed some legislation earlier this year that would require at least 12 municipalities to independently put the new system into use, evaluate it, and report on it before it could be implemented statewide. So with that additional hurdle to clear, it's estimated that statewide implementation wouldn't happen before 2028. So that's what happens if it passes. If it fails, we have the existing primary election system and the current method of selecting candidates, counting votes at the general election. That all of that stays the same as it is now. This is on the ballot because a citizen initiative was aiming to reform our election system to enable nonpartisan races that would lead to more representative and more functional government. So one aim was to remove the the high level of partisanship in elections. Supporters believe this method would they think the objective is to give all candidates, regardless of political party, an equal opportunity to make the general election ballot. And so ranked choice voting, I wanted to note the ranked choice voting is already being used statewide in Alaska and Maine, and for some elections in Hawaii. Ranked choice voting is already being used or is about to be implemented at the municipal level in 14 states across the country. So one other thing I wanted to mention with this is that you could, with this open primary system, you could very well wind up with the top 4 candidates all being in the same party. Or, you know, you could, so you could have members of the same party competing against each other in the general election. It's a very, very different kind of approach. The rules for how somebody gets into the primary don't change. There's nothing changing in that. There's a few different ways you can get on the primary ballot. You are put forward by your party, or you can petition with a certain number of signatures in your locality, or you can file to be a write-in. So those 3 ways of getting on the ballot, a primary ballot, would stay the same under this amendment if it were to pass. But what happens in the primary would change. So everybody's candidates, every party's candidates go on a singular ballot that all residents would vote on a single primary ballot, and the top 4 emerge and go on to the general election. So you could have a very different kind of mix of candidates, and not what we're used to with just a representative of each party, basically. What's it going to cost? State spending by the Office of the Secretary of State will increase about $100,000 in the first year of implementation, and about $6 million every year thereafter to cover costs of hiring staff, updating software, redesigning ballots, conducting voter outreach and education, and reimbursing counties for election costs. The Secretary of State would have to raise business filing fees to cover those extra annual costs, unless the state legislature allocates state general fund monies for this purpose. Local governments will have increased costs to conduct primary and general elections due to needs to update ballots, voting systems, training voters and staffs. The cost to counties is estimated at $5 million for a primary election and $6 million for a general election. The state reimburses a portion of those county election costs. And I don't think I mentioned which offices this concerns. So this is going to be, why don't I have it written down here? So this concerns all state and federal offices except the President of the United States. And it would not include county level offices. So no DAs, county commissioners, they wouldn't be included. So that is the summary of 131. And I think
Kathy, it's in the blue book on page 52, the list of offices that would be affected.
thank you.
Where it's 8:15, so I think I'll go ahead and do the county issue before we take a pause for questions. And then if we have more time, we'll go on to do some of the local Fort Collins issues. We're kind of assuming most people in the audience tonight are from Fort Collins and not Loveland. Moving right along, I think there is no slideshow for the local issues, so I think we can just close the slideshow, huh, Kathy?
Yep.
Okay. Larimer County has one issue on the ballot. It's issue 1A. And by the way, Christine, I put a link to the Larimer County website that is a great resource for the Larimer County issue in the chat. I noticed you put where the league stands one in there, but also right above that, I wrote to you and said, here's the one for the county measure. It's long. It's a lot of words. What the county wants to do is raise a sales tax, would be 15 cents on every $100. That would raise approximately $17,200,000 annually, and whatever amount thereafter. And they want to use that money. Well, that would be a tax that would stay in place for 15 years. It's 0.15 countywide transportation sales and use tax for the purpose of improving roadways, bridges, intersection safety, improving resilience of infrastructure against natural disasters, repairing, replacing, improving, maintaining, constructing roads, bridges, sidewalks, bike lanes, and paths and other infrastructure, other transportation infrastructure, improve travel corridors and support increasing access to community transit services and other mobility options. So, and that's only part of the language. Certain items would be exempt from the sales tax: food for domestic consumption, including food stamps, sales of machineries and tools, and gas, electricity, other residential fuels, low volume sales of by charitable organizations, sales of farm equipment and other things. I did ask Christine to, she put it in the chat, the link to the county website, which will give you more information on this. In 2017, they said in a study, you also may have gotten this lovely little book. Let me see, it looks kind of like that. That has all kinds of tiny print on this as well. Again, in the 2017 study, the county has identified unfunded needs of $645 million. That's $645 million over 15 years, which is the reason they're asking for this special tax. Property taxes just aren't enough, they say, to cover the transportation needs, and we're growing really fast. So it is a new tax, and I encourage you to take a look at the resource that we put in the chat. The chat can be copied. I forget how to do it. Kathy, do you remember how to do it?
How to do what?
Copy the chat so that you can grab all of those links.
Yeah, usually there's 3 dots somewhere. Yeah, so depending on what operating system you're using, maybe down at the very bottom of your chat window, there's 3 dots. If you click on the 3 dots, there's an option to save chat. Those 3 dots might be somewhere else on your chat window.
Real quickly, before we go into the local issues, are there any questions?
Yes, we have a good amount of questions. One goes back to the Prop 128 of the 220 about people sentenced per year for crimes of violence, what percentage would be impacted by the 3-strike rule?
Oh, I don't have that information for you. Sorry.
Okay, then the next one is Prop 129. How do veterinary professional associates compare to the scope of practice and education requirements slash credentialing of physician assistants for humans?
One more time for me, please.
I guess it's kind of just asking how do veterinary professional associates compare to the physician assistants for humans from a requirements and credentials standpoint?
Yeah, I mean that's a worthwhile thing, I think, to compare. And I think you will find, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I do remember reading. So first of all, um, the actual credential, when you look at across the board, you might find a master's degree level is required for these assistant kinds of things for human as well as this veterinary thing. What's different might be the length of time that somebody, the length of the educational program would vary. And it seems to be, although this hasn't been completely settled yet, what looks like it's being proposed for the VPA is a shorter period of time, maybe on the order of 18 months or something like that, to compared to for human applications, it would be more on the order of 2 or 3 years additional study. So, but you can kind of Google around and do research on that. Go ahead, Pat.
This is not a comparison to what humans like a physician's assistant, but there is a chart in the blue book on page 147, and it would require a master's degree for this new veterinary professional associate, and the vet tech is a bachelor's degree, associate or bachelor's degree. So a veterinarian has to go to vet school. A vet PA, if you will, has to have a master's and some additional training. But the chart in the blue book is actually quite useful.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to think about that and look at those comparisons. I think a lot of people are finding those parallels to the human career fields. And if that is something that's meaningful to you, I encourage you to go look at those, do those comparisons. You can just Google around and find that information. One thing I wanted to mention was the CSU program that is under development is they'll tell you, I think the page that we linked is something like 8 things to know. So this is a program under development. It's not an active program, but they're looking at it as something that focuses on cats and dogs. So it's not, it wouldn't be that in this particular program that's being developed, it might be a shorter training program because it's only focused on dogs and cats. It doesn't involve larger animals that might require longer study. So it's all, but because none of it is settled yet on exactly what the educational requirements are, it's very difficult to say what the comparisons are. If that answers the question, I hope.
Okay.
24, I think, well, oh, I'm sorry, Christine, are there more?
There are a good amount more. Would you like to focus on the questions or go forward with the rest of the presentation?
Well, it's 8:24. We said we were going to be done at 8:30. I don't know.
Yeah, I was only going to cover the school district issues, and I really wouldn't be providing much more information except for, other than what you can find on the school websites. I wanted to mention that Thompson School District provides a nice little calculator on their website. So the link that we provided, if you're in Thompson School District, there's a little calculator at the bottom of one of their pages, so you can put in the value of your home and see what it would cost you for one or both of those ballot measures. They have both a special mill levy and a bond issue, and Poudre School District has only the special mill levy. And I just wanted to say a few words about what a special mill levy is, if you're not clear on that. Special mill levy is increase of your property taxes that is allowed under Colorado law called the Debt-Free Schools Act. So the Debt-Free Schools Act made it possible for schools to borrow to raise a little bit more money through property taxes and not incur debt. So the normal way of raising money for capital construction, if you need to build new schools or do major renovations on your schools, is through a bond issue. And the Debt-Free Schools Act made it possible. It was passed in 2016. It made it possible for schools to raise the mill levy a little bit to cover costs for capital, only a certain number of things that he could spend this money on, capital construction being the main one. So the building new schools, renovations, maintenance, and technology upgrades, new technology. So very specific things that has to be spent on, and the special mill levy also has a special accounting procedure. That money has to be kept separate and accounted for separately because it's the funding has to be designated for certain purposes. So that with a special mill levy, you're increasing your property taxes to fund the schools a little bit more for special, certain things, to major renovation, construction, technology. A bond issue does the same thing. It's for capital construction and those things I've already talked about. So what Poudre School District and Thompson School District are looking at is having these special mill levies, and on Thompson, the bond issue, to as a way of raising money to cover their needs for capital construction and renovations, technology, all those things. If they have a special fund for that, they can spend more of their general monies on increasing salaries, which they'd like to do, and the other, staffing and other programming improvements they'd like to make. So I hope that helps a little bit to see what's at issue with education questions.
Christine, maybe just one more question, and then we could just briefly mention where the league stands. There's a link in the chat on some of the ballot issues that the league has taken a position on, the statewide ones.
Okay.
Or one.
I have a very quick one first. If you vote yes for ballot issue 1A, does that mean you are for the tax increase?
Yes.
Okay. And then I guess now it's hard to pick. For Proposition 131, or if we are voting for, say, 2 U.S. senators in the same year, would there be 4 primary winners and 2 general election winners? Why isn't U.S. President ranked choice voted in this proposition?
We're not in charge of U.S. president's elections, and we have electoral college that is part of the Constitution of the United States. You would have 4 advance to the general election, and I guess if you're voting for senator, 2 would win. Is that what you understand, Kathy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And then a real quick, do you know if the Forest Service or any organization like that has weighed in on the big cat hunting measure 127?
They have not. It's not Forest Service, it's the Wildlife Department of Wildlife, and they aren't allowed to.
Okay. I think that's everything.
I saw in chat someone was asking whether there would ever be a chance to split the open primaries from the ranked choice voting, and so right now that's a package deal. So that proposition comes as a package. So you get open primaries and ranked choice. You can't choose one or both. So it's a package deal.
Okay, yeah. So if you wanted to do that last part, and then we can finish.
Do you want to do that, Pat?
I certainly can. I did ask Christine, and she put in the chat a link to the League of Women Voters of Larimer County. If you just Google Larimer County League, you will get our website. And on the homepage for our website, you will see it says where the league stands. And that will give you a link to the state quick reference guide, and you can then find out more about those issues that for which the league has taken a position. We would look at a proposition and see if it lined up with our position and therefore take a stand on it. So those items, I don't know if you want to run,
I can run through it if you don't have it handy. Do you want me to go through it?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so
I'm okay if we want to go over, that's totally up to you too. And people obviously can leave if they need to. So,
the idea would be we're just going to go through, pro or con each one of these amendments we just went through, or the ballot issues we just went through. If people want to note that down, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, it's completely up to the two of you. And then, like I said, if people need to leave, they can.
It'll take about 2 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. So, shall I do that, Pat?
I'll do the first 4. You go, and then we can cover the ones.
I didn't know. Okay, no, go right ahead. You can just take it all. Go ahead.
Okay. G, modify property tax exemption for veterans. The league is in favor, supporting that measure. H, judicial disciplinary procedures. We are also supporting that measure. Constitutional bail exception for first-degree murder. We took no stance on that one. Repeal J, the repealing of the definition of marriage. We are in support of that measure. K, modifying the constitutional electoral deadlines. We are supporting that. 79, constitutional right to abortion. We are supporting that. 80, constitutional right to school choice. We are opposing that one. JJ, retaining additional sports betting tax revenue. We are in favor of. KK, firearms and admissions ammunitions excise tax. We are supporting that measure. 127, we didn't take a stand on. That's the Mountain Lion one. 128, parole eligibility. We did not take a stand. 129, veterinary professional associates. We did not take a stand. The 130, funding for law enforcement, we oppose. And 131, the all candidate primary and ranked choice voting for general elections, we are supporting. That's it. How'd I do?
If there happens to be anybody in the city of Loveland online, we are also supporting ballot issue 2E on the 1% sales tax increase. In case you want to know, we support that issue.
And we didn't take a stand on any of the other local issues.
Right.
Okay. Anything else before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you again for hosting us. Christine, the library is very kind to host this for us. And thank you all for being voters. Yeah. We have good voters.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I hope we gave you enough information to find those answers and resources out there. But thank you very much. And please do vote your entire ballot. Thank you for staying with us so long. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for presenting. This was great. I think we had in and out a total of close to 60 people. So this was really great. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some blue books and some other resources at the library, but I think pretty much everything has been covered in the links that were sent out. So thank you everyone for coming, and we're going to go ahead and end this session.
Okay. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you.
Good job, Kathy.